Welcome. Tonight is Monday, September 23rd, 2019. This is the regular City Council meeting for the City of St. Peter. It is 7 o'clock p.m. We'll call the meeting to order. Would all please join in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You all should have a copy of the agenda. Are there any changes or corrections to the agenda? If not, is there a motion to approve?
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Second.
All in favor of the agenda as presented, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The agenda is approved. Next, we have the minutes from our September 9th, 2019 meeting. Those minutes appear on pages 5 through 7. Are there any corrections or changes, comments to those minutes? If not, is there a motion to approve?
Make a motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor of the minutes as written, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Those minutes are approved. First up tonight, we have 4 public hearings. We will take all of them individually. And Todd, if you want to give the background for the procedure, and then we'll get into them.
All right. Mr. Mayor and members, as you know, you have a policy related to how public hearings work. First of all, there's a staff presentation, then there's opportunity for an applicant to provide factual information relative to the application that they've submitted to the city. And then there's an opportunity for public comment. We try and limit speakers to 5 minutes, and we hope that they stick on topic with a factual basis. And the council generally listens to that information, but tries to avoid having discussion with the folks that are presenting information. Discussion and questions come later, should the council have a decision point or an agenda item asking for a decision as we move forward. I think that's the quick version.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So first up, we will call the public hearing to order at 7:03 p.m. on Monday, September 23rd, 2019, for the Religious Assembly Public Assembly Zoning Code modifications. And Mr. Willie.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council, your current zoning ordinance regulates assemblies in 2 fashions. The first land use would be considered religious assembly, which would be churches, mosques, synagogues, and such. The other one would be public assembly, which would be arenas, sports arenas, movie theaters, and alike uses. In 2000, the federal government passed the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act. The act would not allow communities to regulate uses in a manner that would treat religious assembly institutions on less than an equal term with non-religious uses. It would not allow regulations that discriminate based on religion or denomination. It would not allow regulations that would totally exclude religious assembly from the community, and it cannot unreasonably limit religious assembly institutions or structures. There's no allegation that your ordinance does as much. However, it has become a trend in the industry for persons to remove connotations to religious uses and then to regulate such uses in assemblies as they would with assemblies for any other lawful purpose. As such, the Planning Commission has considered a recommendation to remove the land use religious assembly and then alternatively regulating churches, mosques, synagogues, and such as a public assembly. It would require that a new definition be adopted, and the new definition in a public assembly to incorporate those other uses would be proposed to be changed to public assembly is facilities for major public assembly, recreation, sports, amusement, entertainment, or worship. Typical uses include, but shall not be limited to, community auditoriums, sports stadium, convention facilities, fairground, exhibition facilities, and places of worship. It's most appropriate to regulate the assembly based upon the characteristics of the assembly, not based upon the activities of those that are participating. So as such, I would recommend, I had recommended to the Planning Commission to remove public assembly, remove religious assembly, regulate as public assembly. And I'd suggest that the League of Minnesota Cities in their zoning handbook would support such an action. In the handbook, they say some ordinances now employ a broad definition of places of assembly that include both religious and non-religious uses. This approach may go a long way towards protecting the city from any equal terms challenge under the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act. Members of the council, Mr. Mayor, the ordinance then would indicate in which zones it could be considered, and the ordinance amendment then would allow for the consideration of public assembly as a conditional use in the R1 single family, R2 two family, R3 multifamily, R4 large lot residential, the Central Business District, the Highway C4 Commercial District, the C5 Business Professional District, as well as then the 2 industrial districts. And again, be considered as a conditional use. That would conclude what I had to present, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. We will bring this up again if there's any other questions then. Otherwise, is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak to this matter? If not, this will be coming up for a new ordinance approval later, and then if we have questions for Russ at that point, we can ask him then. If there is no one else that would like to speak on this matter, we will close the public hearing for the religious assembly and public assembly for the zoning code modifications at 7:07 p.m. on Monday, September 23rd, 2019. Next up, we have another public hearing for a daycare operation zoning code modification, and we will open that public hearing at 7:07 p.m. on Monday, September 23rd, 2019.
Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, the second zoning ordinance amendment recommended to you tonight by the Planning Commission would regulate daycare services. Your current ordinance has 2 definitions of daycare based upon the number of children or persons that would be served. The first would be you have daycare services limited, which would regulate the daycare to less than 6 or fewer children. Those of 7 or more then are daycare services general in your current ordinance. We've determined that nearly all of the in-home daycares are operating above the 6 child limit. They are regulated typically by the state as a group family daycare, which would allow for the care of up to 14 children at one time, and that does include the children of the person providing the care if they're still at the home. As such, the Planning and Zoning Commission has recommended a modification of the ordinance to bring it in line with the state regulations. As such, they have recommended that you amend the definition to read group family daycare, which is daycare for no more than 14 individuals at one time. The total number of children includes all children of any caregiver when the children are present in the residence. Such uses include, but are not limited to, nursery schools, preschools, daycare centers, or children for children or adults and similar uses. Then, to cover the daycare services for 14 or more children, amend the definition of daycare center to read a facility or use of a building or portion thereof for the care of 15 or more individuals. Such uses include, but are not limited to, nursery schools, preschools, daycare centers for children or adults and similar uses. The ordinance recommended, the change in the ordinance recommended then would allow for the consideration of a group family daycare, 14 children or less, as a conditional use permit in all of the zoning districts, and then a daycare center, which would be for more than 14 children, would be a conditional use in all but the R1 zoning district. The Planning Commission reviewed and considered the matter at their August 8th meeting, and they have recommended that you adopt the amendment. Notice of the public hearing has been both posted and published as per the state statute, and that would conclude my presentation, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Again, is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak on this matter? And the council, if we can hold our questions until it comes up later, that'd be great. And then we'll move through these. If there are no questions or no one else that wants to speak, we will close the public hearing for daycare operation zone modification at 7:10 p.m. on Monday, September 23rd, 2019. Next up, we have a Parks and Rec Services in Industrial Zones modification.
Mayor and members of the city.
Just before we start, then we will open that public hearing at 7:10 PM on Monday, September 23rd, 2019. Okay.
Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, at this point, the Parks Department, along with a private group, is considering the location of an alternative dog park within St. Peter. Given that the current site across the river is been largely unavailable this season, and it's usually unavailable in the spring, there seems to be a want or a need for an alternative dog park, which could remain perhaps high and dry during most or if not all of the year. As such, they've been reviewing possible sites within the city of St. Peter, and a couple of the sites they have identified as potential dog park locations are included in the industrially zoned districts. At this point, your definition of park and rec services indicates that it is city-owned park services. Given that it is not allowed in the industrial zones, there's not a process for the city to provide themselves through the variance or to circumvent the zoning ordinance and grant them the ability to have a dog park. That would be considered a use variance, which is specifically prohibited in state statute. If those sites were to be considered as potential dog park, it would be most appropriate then to amend the zoning ordinance to add park and recreation services as onto the permitted uses in the I-1 and the I-2 district. The Planning Commission considered the matter at their August 8th meeting, and they've recommended the adoption of the ordinance amendment presented to you. This would then provide for consideration of park and rec services in the I-1 and I-2 zoning districts as a permitted use. There was a comfort, given that it was city-owned, that the City Council would use the appropriate discretion and come to the right decision on judiciously locating parks in I-1 and I-2 districts. That will conclude my presentation, Mr. Mayor.
All right. Again, is anyone in the audience that would like to speak on this matter for the Parks and Rec Services and Industrial Zones modifications? If not, we will close the public hearing for the Parks and Rec Services at 7:13 PM on Monday, September 23rd, 2019. Next up, we have a tax increment financing district modification, and we are going to open that public hearing at 7:13 PM on Monday, September 23rd, 2019, and Mr. Sweeney is here to join us again tonight.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the council. Shannon Sweeney with David Brown Associates here to talk to you about a resolution that we've drafted for your consideration. In 2003, we created the Washington Terrace Tax Increment Financing District for the purpose of capturing new property taxes that were generated within that subdivision, to use those new property taxes in order to assist in buying down the cost of a purchase of a new lot. The cost of infrastructure is extremely high. The cost of developing new lots was extremely high and was essentially considered a barrier to new development. And so we created a TIF district similar in scope to what we had done previously with the Nicollet Meadows project, only in this instance it was for Washington Terrace. And we've been capturing those property taxes since that time to assist in making debt service payments on financing that was issued to fund those initial improvements. Those bonds will be paid off February 1st of this next year. And so we have an opportunity to continue to use those tax increments to assist our most recent project, our Traverse Green project. Traverse Green is developing a little bit more slowly than projected. We have debt service payments that we're making on bonds that were issued to fund improvements there. And we have an opportunity to use funds from the Washington Terrace TIF district in order to support that bond issue for a period of time as houses continue to develop there, and it generates sufficient tax increment to survive on its own, for lack of a better term. And so we've recommended proceeding in that manner, and we've drafted a resolution that essentially declares that that's what our intentions are. Ultimately, it's not necessarily a requirement of statute to adopt such a resolution, but we think it helps communicate our intentions to lots of folks, including the county and school district who we sent letters to inviting them to participate in this public hearing. So, Washington Terrace TIF district presently captures about $154,000 a year in tax increment. debt payments on the 2016A bonds that were issued to fund the Traverse Green project are about $140,000 a year. So those tax increments will be sufficient to make those debt payments for a period of time, anyway through 2031 if needed, but we expect that it probably won't be needed for that long. So that's the information I have to present on this particular issue, and I'll be back to answer your questions when you consider it.
I'm just going to say, Shannon, you don't have to leave. All we have is a consent agenda after
Okay.
this, so you can just stay there. So, anyone in the audience that would like to address or have any comments on this tax increment financing district modification? If not, we are going to close that public hearing at 7:16 p.m. on Monday, September 23rd, 2019. Next up, we will address visitors. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak to the council on any agenda item? Seeing no one, is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak to the council on any matter whatsoever? Seeing no one, we will move to the consent agenda. And Todd, if you want to put a little modification in here, I believe you're going to have one. If you want to start with that, and then I'll add it later.
Mr. Mayor and members, I do have a memo on your table requesting that you add to your consent agenda the termination of a part-time bus driver. As you know, under state statute, since you're a statutory A city, no termination or hire can occur without your approval. In other words, the city administrator can't do it on their own. The city council has to approve any hire and termination. Information is included on your desk, and I'd appreciate it if you could put that, and my recommendation is to put it on your consent agenda for termination of that part-time bus driver.
All right. With that addition, the consent agenda begins in detail on page 9 and concludes with the resolution on page 28, and includes the following budgeted purchases in excess of $10,000 to Chris Engineering for replacement cutting edges for $14,809, to Veit and Company for sanitary sewer lining for $41,400. The addition of the termination of the part-time bus driver is the next item that we will insert. And plus the regular schedule of disbursements for September 5th, 2019 through September 18th, 2019. Are there any questions, comments on the consent agenda with the addition? Steve?
This one is directed to Mr. Moulton, our Public Works Director. I have several questions. First one, relative to the replacement cutting edges, what's the life expectancy of replacement blades? And how damaging are these blades to the actual bituminous pavement on our streets?
Good question.
We'll have you come up,
Yeah,
Pete.
please.
The cutting edges are replaced on an as-needed basis, depending on the year that we have with snowfall. So really, we try to get a year plus out of them if we can. Most of the time, we're replacing them on an annual basis. We try to get a blade that will wear well, so we try to patch our streets so that they're level and we're not digging into the roadway. But they do take a toll on the roadway, as you can see after the winter when we've done snow removal. There is quite a bit of scraping on that roadway, and that's what makes a lot of the salt effective. Cleaner roads make it easier to maintain.
So are they actually steel or are they a real hard rubber?
They're steel.
They're steel?
Yes.
Okay. One other question regarding the wastewater liners. How do you go ahead and install those liners, and how do you know that these areas are the ones where you're having water penetration?
Now, the areas that we're looking at here, first to answer your first question, how are they installed? What they do is they access both manholes, and then they pull a wire rope string through the line, pull the liner in, then they use a resin on the liner, then they use a water or air mixture to heat that up so that it hardens in place. The reason we know these areas are needing attention is we've televised those lines and identified the deficiencies.
Okay, thanks, Pete. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Any other questions or comments? Ed?
Page 23, Rivers Edge Hospital and Clinic. I understand the blood draw, the top one, and then the drug and alcohol testing, but what are the other two, the rent in January and July and so forth?
If I can, Sally, would you answer this one? This does relate to the medical office building, which you are in ownership of. So as you know, there's a hospital, and then kind of in between, there's a medical office building, and then there's where the Mayo Clinic building is. These expenditures relate to the debt service payment and how work is scheduled to make that happen, and how you make payment on that debt service.
Okay. I was just wondering what it was.
Yep.
Yeah, so we show that it's our expense out and then they
And they
owe us. So
reimburse.
sometimes it goes the opposite way, that they owe us a check back. This time in these months, we owed them money.
Okay.
But the big huge.
The hospital is ultimately responsible to pay the debt on the medical office building.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Anyone else? The resolution approving the consent agenda appears on page 28. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any other questions or comments? Call the roll, please.
Councilmember Fleming.
Aye.
Councilmember Pfeiffer.
Aye.
Councilmember Graham.
Aye.
Councilmember Barris.
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson.
Aye.
Mayor Zimmerman.
Aye. Consent agenda is approved. Shannon's back. First thing we have is unfinished business, and we're back to the tax increment financing district modification.
Greetings, Mayor and member of the council. As mentioned during the public hearing, we've prepared a resolution declaring our intent to use increments from TIF District 1-15 to support the 2016A bonds that were issued to fund the infrastructure improvements for Traverse Green. More than happy to answer your questions regarding that activity.
Questions? I have one question for you, Shannon,
Sure.
and I don't know if you know offhand. You said the other previous district, or the existing one, I guess, generates $154,000 of taxes that we can
Yes.
generate. Do we know up to this point what Traverse Green is generating? Do we have any idea?
I knew I was going to get asked that question.
Really? Then why don't you know the answer?
Because I'd shut my computer off.
That's okay. I mean, I was just curious, if
We have-
$140,000 worth of debt payment,
What's defined, or what we consider tax increments, are both lot sales revenue and the actual tax increments that were collected. I would say that tax increments themselves have been pretty modest to date, because that construction occurred in the last couple of years, and those aren't hitting the tax system yet, what we see out there. By modest, I believe from last year, I recall, somewhere less than $20,000, so.
that would probably seem about right, because
Yes.
it always trails a year behind when the
Yes.
payments are made.
Yeah.
So,
They're $200,000 homes, it's probably $2,000 a year of taxes,
Yeah,
or maybe
probably
10,
a
maybe
little bit
10 of
more.
them.
Yep.
So, yeah, would be a
Yep.
good guess.
Ed?
So if we don't do this, where does that $154,000 go to?
It goes to the city, county, and school district.
Get split up between
Correct.
everybody? So
Yep.
right now, it just comes to us.
That's correct.
It'd
And
be-
which
it-
is-
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Which is the reason we notified the county and school district of our intended action and invited them to attend this hearing.
Okay.
In the past, I won't speak for the superintendent today, but they've been very supportive of our efforts in this area, and have felt that ultimately it benefits them, because they receive more of their revenue from increasing enrollment than they do from property taxes.
Any other
Thanks.
questions? Steve?
Todd, if at the end of the bond payments for the infrastructure at any given housing development, and we continue to collect tax increment financing, does that balance then become discretionary funds for the city, or does it have to be returned to those three entities, the county, the city, and the school district?
So that would be returned and split amongst the jurisdiction based on the percentages relative to the tax rates that are in place.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Technically, the district would be decertified, and then that split would occur with any remaining dollars.
Okay, thank
So-
you.
So the excess, the 154, over 140, that 14,000, where does that go?
Ultimately, it goes where you want. It could be put into the debt service fund for those bonds.
Right.
Or it could be considered excess increment and returned to the county for redistribution.
I think the first.
Or it
one's
could
fine.
be spent on another qualified housing project technically, but our intent is to apply it to debt service on the 2016 A bonds.
Right. Okay, just so people know that. Any other questions? Good questions. If not, the resolution pledging tax increment from Tax Increment Financing District 1-15 for payments into the general obligation tax increment appears on pages 30 and 31. Is there a motion for approval?
Make a motion to approve.
Second.
Any other questions or comments? Call the roll, please.
Councilmember Pfeiffer.
Aye.
Councilmember Graham.
Aye.
Councilmember Paris.
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson.
Aye.
Mayor Zimmern.
Aye.
Councilmember Quillen.
Aye.
Resolution is approved. Thank you, Shannon. That concludes our our unfinished business. Next, we have new business, and we will be discussing the zoning code modifications that we have the public hearings on, and the first one is the Religious Assembly, Public Assembly. And Russ.
Yep, Mr. Mayor, I guess I'd answer any questions that you or members of the council might have.
Okay. Anyone have any questions? Steve?
Russ, on page 32, how would you define a substantial burden on the religious entity?
If I may, could I defer to legal counsel? That's kind of a legal term on it. Jim, you want to take a shot at that?
Oh, yeah.
Basically, I think I haven't reviewed that statute in depth, but I believe what they're talking about is you can't make it more difficult for a religious place than you would for someone else. You got it. It's a freedom of religion type thing under, I believe it's the First Amendment. You can't impair religious things. So I think that's what the law is looking at, is you can't put a substantial burden on that religious assembly.
Okay.
It does not excuse them from the zoning regulations. They still have to follow the same zoning regulations, but the zoning regulations can't be to the extent that they're infringing on the religious operations or the ability to worship as they are, or you cannot put restrictions on a synagogue that you wouldn't put on a Lutheran church. So you need to treat the denominations similar, but you can't infringe on that religious use. It also applies to other religious uses such as religious schools, cemeteries, even homeless shelters that have been operated by churches. So it's pretty wide encompassing federal legislation.
Good. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Any other questions or comments? If not, the ordinance amending the St. Peter City Code sections as they relate to, as they regulate religious assembly and public assembly use appears on pages 34 and 35. Is there a motion for approval?
So move, Mr. Mayor.
Second.
Any other questions or comments? Call the roll, please.
Councilmember Graham.
Aye.
Councilmember Paris.
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson.
Aye.
Mayor Zeman.
Aye.
Councilmember Quillen.
Aye.
Councilmember Pfeiffer.
Aye.
Ordinance is approved. Ordinance modification, probably should say. Next up, we have the zoning code modification for the daycare operations.
Yep,
Russ?
Mr. Mayor, I won't rehash my previous presentation, but again, the Planning Commission has recommended this alteration. Being regulated as a conditional use, raising the threshold from 6 to 14 children, if necessary, and one of the conditions could be that you authorize fewer than 14 children, but it would be considered on a case-by-case basis after reviewing the 17 standards that are included in the ordinance.
Okay. Questions? Roger?
At those meetings, I thought we had settled on letting the state, we're going to go by whatever the state regulates. So that way we don't have something different. And that way if the state fluctuates, we don't have to fluctuate again.
Yep, and that's, the state limit was 14 children within their licensing.
Right, we said no number. We said to state what the state licensing will regulate that number. Because if we state a number and the state changes it, now we have to change again.
That wasn't what my notes reflected. I apologize if I had that in error.
I don't know. do
Yeah,
you remember?
we did have that discussion. I'm not sure we reached resolution or agreement on it. We did talk about that,
Yeah,
though.
yeah, and because I know that forgive me, I forget her name. She ran a daycare, and she was saying how it was...
Kelly and Henry Kelly, Kelly
Yes,
Henry.
thank you. That, it's so regulated already by the state that we don't need to have something different in our statute. And so that's where, I remember her and I for sure, and some others. But again, I don't remember if that was the final proposal, but that was my understanding, is that's where we were.
Mayor and members, if I can, the minutes from planning and zoning reflect this as the number that was decided upon, and so those have moved forward. We are obligated as staff to carry forward that. So if the council would like to make a change, that is certainly within your purview. My suggestion would be is if you want to make that change, that you table this issue, direct staff to come back with an appropriate draft to make sure that we have it exactly the way that you want it. But we are obligated to carry forward what was discussed and what the minutes approved from planning and zoning. So not to say that that discussion didn't happen, it's just, that's kind of our check and balance for these.
Sure.
And so, again, it is within the purview of the council to make a modification if you wish.
Could we, as long as we have counsel here, could we not, if we want to, modify it at this point?
You certainly can modify it at this point. I don't want to miss something that might happen or how it interacts with other ordinances. It might be a very simple modification. I haven't examined it at that level, Mr. Mayor, but...
Our ordinance then would refer to a specific state ordinance, and we don't know what that is sitting here.
From my perspective, from my chair, this isn't something that we need to do immediately. Certainly, you've called for the hearing. This could be at your next council meeting if you so desire. We don't have a timeline to drive this forward that's been set by any external force that I'm aware of, so you certainly have the luxury of a timeline that you would set on yourselves.
I would suggest tabling it to get that in there so we don't have to,
make a
otherwise
motion?
we'll have to jump through hoops again
Want to
down
make
the
a motion
line.
to that effect?
I'll make a motion that we table this to, this agenda item to
And direct staff to provide a
To direct staff.
draft.
draft this appropriately for the state statute in relation to the number of children allowed.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Pardon me, Russ?
I'd again ask the city attorney, there's a 60-day rule that says a decision must be made within 60 days. Now, you are the applicant, so I believe you can waive that 60 days, but otherwise, if you don't take action within 60 days, it's my understanding that it would become in effect by default. Is that correct?
Who applied for
What's that?
it? Who applied for this?
Well, it was initiated by the planning commission. So,
So was there really an application? Did someone come in with an application to do this? Or
As
was there no
a
application?
practice, when we have these come forward that are initiated through either a board or commission or from council or from staff, there is an application that's utilized, so it follows the same process. We treat internal requests the same as external requests.
Then it suggested that the tabling would be appropriate on condition that the council needs more information. I believe that's allowed in the 60-day rule, that they can table it, they can extend the 60 days to obtain more information.
sure.
I believe that's what you're doing here.
If we do this at our next meeting, which is 3 weeks, we should have it done by then, I would hope.
I'd have to go back and count the days, just because of the cycle and how this occurs with planning and zoning, we could be close to that 60-day number. But I would suggest that a belt and suspenders approach could be that as a part of the motion to table, we waive the 60-day rule on the application, which could then be approved by the council as a part of this action, and then we're set to go.
Then I'll add the
You
60-day
want to modify
waiver
your, okay,
to my motion.
And I'll modify the second.
all right. Any other questions or comments?
Just as a point of clarification, Mayor and members, the goal here is that staff will then come back without going through planning and zoning, come back with a modification that indicates the connection to state statute rather than the number 14.
Yes, sir.
Got it.
All in favor of tabling this zoning modification for the daycare operations signify by saying aye,
And if I could, just for the record, for clarification, and waiving the 60 days.
and waiving the 60 days. Signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? This matter is tabled until everything can be squared away. With the 60-day. Next up, we have the parks and the zoning modification for the Parks and Rec Services. Russ?
Yep. Mr. Mayor, again, I'd answer questions, and again, I would state that this does not cite any particular park. This allows for consideration of establishing park and rec services in your I-1 and I-2 zoning districts as a permitted use.
So
What?
just
Oh, sorry.
just to be clear, Mayor and members, this is not just for dog parks. This could be any park, any type of park.
City-owned.
Correct. Thank you, sir.
Questions? If not, an ordinance amending the St. Peter Code, sections 24,379 and 24,409 by adding park and recreation services to the roster of permitted uses within the industrial zoning districts, appears on pages 44 and 45. Is there a motion for approval?
Make a motion to approve.
Second.
Now, any questions or comments? Call the roll, please, Barb.
Councilmember Paris.
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson.
Aye.
Mayor Zine.
Aye.
Councilmember Koenig.
Aye.
Councilmember Pfeiffer.
Aye.
Councilmember Graham.
Aye.
Ordinance is approved. Thank you, Russ.
Mr. Mayor, with these zoning changes come before us, and normally we have no questions, and they just go through, well, Roger's a pain in the neck, but other than that, they normally go through and nobody has anything to say, and it's just everybody votes aye, and it looks pretty dull. The time we spend at planning and zoning, going back and forth in this, that's where the fun is. That's where the exchange of differing opinions takes place. So that's where you ought to be volunteering to be serving the communities on boards and commissions like that, because they are fun.
And that's why I did not push it any further. I was going to ask if they had been approved by the planning and zoning, because I knew that you guys would thoroughly discuss these. So, and Russ pointed that out, that they were approved. Next up, we have the 2020 equipment certificate purchase. Mr. Moulton.
Mayor Zeman and City Council, I'm here today to ask you to approve our work with receiving a new John Deere motor grader. As you can see, our 17-year-old unit is getting near its useful life, starting to see wear in a variety of different areas. We have looked at and driven both the John Deere 772 GP and the Caterpillar 12M3, and the staff really like the John Deere unit, and they'd like to proceed with that going forward. Both units were priced out with the Falls blade attachment, which includes a wing for the grader. You can see the prices on the state bid program, both for RDO equipment, which would supply the John Deere, and from Ziegler Cat, which would supply the Caterpillar. As you can also see, the trade-in is about $78,000. Still has some value, and it does bring us a little bit under, about $25,000 underneath where we thought we would be going forward. The reason that we are coming to you tonight to expedite this is we can guarantee the 2019 prices for the unit should we purchase it tonight. With your authorization, the unit would be built, delivered into Minnesota, taken to Little Falls. The attachments would be put on, delivered to us sometime in December. Our goal was to not have payment for this unit until the 2020 season. The manufacturer is well aware of that and have approved that agreement. At that time, we would be receiving quotes for equipment certificate, moving forward financially with those purchases, which falls into kind of our time frame for getting things going. The manufacturer is also pushing for this because they would like to get our unit in December and turn it back over in January and have it sold to somebody else for the January, February months this winter. I'm available for questions. There's a resolution on page 48. If there's any questions, I would be glad.
Questions?
Yes, sir.
Gary?
Pete, what's the horsepower rating between the two, the Cat and the John Deere?
I cannot tell you right off the top of my head, Jerry.
They
I
should
had
be
it all
very
in the-
similar.
Yeah, you're probably in the 225 range,
How much?
225. I'm not sure exactly which one has which, but that's usually about where we're at for horsepower.
Thank you.
Steve?
I have a couple of questions, Pete. The fall blade, is that the blade on the wing?
Yep.
Why do they call it a fall blade?
That's just the manufacturer.
Okay.
Yeah, it's up in Little Falls.
And, this is kind of a strange, why, when you see these road graders, the wheels are turned at a kind of a kittywampus angle.
Yeah,
Why is
traction
that?
power.
Yeah, why is that?
Traction and power, when you have the blade down, it's trying to push you.
Okay,
Which means
you're sideways.
Yep.
All right.
And so they use that to resist the pull and to give it more power.
Would you ever consider purchasing the Caterpillar because it has a joystick? I sure would like to drive one of those.
It's really driver's preference. The John Deere has
Yeah.
both, and so they can use that, get used to that. It just depends on what the operator likes when they go into the piece of equipment.
Well, I mean, I could operate a joystick. If you put a lift on it, I'd be more than willing to do it just for the fun of it.
I've seen you drive, fit entry level weight, so.
What's that? Oh, minimum, I do it for nothing.
Okay, Steve, someday, let's go over to Mankato and we'll go to the cat dealer over there. And you said you just go try one out and to see what they say.
Well, there'll have to be a larger empty space though, Steve.
Remind me of what day you're gonna do that. I wanna be off the road. We won't have a parking problem if we bring Steve into some of these areas.
Any other questions? I have one, Pete. Who monitors the state bid and who sits on the state bid situation? We hear about this all the time, the
Yep.
state bid.
Dave Dennerson, our mechanic, does a lot of that, along with our superintendents. We monitor and watch that. We also price it out for the next year, and so those guys will give us a heads up and say, hey, this is gonna go up about 10, 12%. Sometimes that's okay, just depending on the amount of money you're spending on a piece of equipment like that. But we're in the $25,000. We thought it was worth going for the 19.
But what I was getting at is who at this, if it says state bid, who at the state determines who they're gonna contact to get on this state bid list?
They open it up. They put together a minimum
Okay.
specification that says, there could be several classes of road grader.
Okay.
Or
So there's a
motor grader.
department.
Yeah,
It's part of the Department of
Part of the state.
Administration.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so they'll specify a certain level of type of grader and say, if you meet this criteria, you can bid in this bracket.
Right.
And if you don't, you can bid in this bracket or wherever those brackets are.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? If not, the resolution approving the 2020 equipment certificate purchase for the 2019 John Deere motor grader with blade appears on page 48. Is there a motion for approval?
So move, Mr. Mayor.
Second.
Any other questions or comments? Roll, please.
Councilmember Johnson.
Aye.
Mayor Zine.
Aye.
Councilmember Ford.
Aye.
Councilmember Pfeiffer.
Aye.
Councilmember Graham.
Aye.
Councilmember Barris.
Aye.
Resolution is approved.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pete. Next up, we have the request for city assistance for the haunted hayride. And Todd?
Mayor, members, this has been put on in the past few years by the Nicollet County Trails Association. As you know, they use Mill Pond Park and the City Hall parking area. And the trail that goes from that area, from Mill Pond to the south, probably a couple of thousand feet, give or take a little bit. The Trail Association has requested utilization as in the past. The request is on page 51 through page 52, and the resolution providing approval is on page 53. This is very similar to the past requests that you have seen, with two exceptions, one of which is that they're not looking to utilize the City Hall parking lot in the same way that they've used it in the past, which I think is a good thing. I think the second one that might have the biggest impact is that they're requesting utilization until midnight rather than 11 o'clock, which is what you have provided in the past. Just to be clear, you have authorized their utilization till 11 o'clock. They're asking for, and staff is recommending, that you allow it until midnight. We've had very few problems. I'd also say that we do have the opportunity, if there are complaints or other issues that come up, that the resolution does provide for, the police department can ask them to stop operations if we get a number of complaints about noise and other things. But that has not been a concern. The first year, there was a lot of concern, what would happen new. We just haven't seen that throughout the past operations and opportunities that they run. Again, the resolution's on page 53 and 54. They're required to have the insurance and all those things that we expect from other groups that utilize your park facilities.
Questions? Third year, right? Do we have it in here?
I think it's third or fourth, yeah.
Okay. Questions? Steve?
I don't have a question, Mr. Mayor, but I just want to encourage people to attend. It's really a good event, and I've been to it. The other thing, I know they're looking for different actors right now, and I could know of a few people on the city council that I would recommend, Mr. Mayor, that would be more than scary, and they wouldn't have to really dress up that much.
If we can get Jerry there, we'll,
Okay, I'll talk to him after the meeting
all
tomorrow.
right. Any other questions or comments? Not the resolution for the city assistance request for the Haunted Hayride event appears on pages 53 and 54. Is there a motion for approval?
Make a motion to approve.
Second.
Any more questions or comments? Call the roll, please.
Mayor Zeman.
Aye.
Councilmember Bowman.
Aye.
Councilmember Pfeiffer.
Aye.
Councilmember Graham.
Aye.
Councilmember Paris.
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson.
Aye.
Resolution is approved. That concludes our new business. Next up, we have reports. The only thing I want to put in is that a reminder that this weekend, Friday and Saturday, 27th and 28th, is Oktoberfest. Right across the street from us here, I was thinking we're downtown, but on parking lot number 5. Parking lot number 5 downtown.
They moved it.
Yeah, I was thinking it was right out here, but it's moved. So, always seems to be a good event. That's all I have.
Mayor members, I have a couple that I want to mention to you that are on the list, and one additional. First of all, we are looking to schedule a finance committee meeting, and I am so sorry. My computer decided to do an update for some odd reason at this time. So I'm Barb, do you remember the date? I don't remember the
It is
date.
October 21st at 4:30 before the workshop.
And so the participants in that are Councilmember Kwame and the mayor are the finance committee. So this will be a review. As you may recall, your city attorney contract ends at the end of this year, and so this is the start of that process to initiate that discussion. So please get that on your calendars if you would.
Where is that?
It'll be in the St. Peter room where the workshop is.
The next item that I have is just to fill people in on the hospital CEO recruitment process. First of all, I want to thank George for his services. Last day is the first week of December. Believe it's the 4th. Jerry's putting up 4 fingers. I believe it's the 4th. The commission has started work on approving the process for that, and that commission and council will work in tandem on a new hire. As that process will really start in full swing, likely after the hospital commission meeting on Wednesday. There's some still approvals to go forward with that. So if you have other questions, please feel free to let me know, and we'll want to make sure to get interviews on your calendar as soon as possible. Those are likely to occur towards the end of November. Again, council and commission work in tandem. I do want to mention that there will certainly be partner participation in this and an opportunity for the public to meet the finalists. We've used this process in the past, and I think it's worked very well. So I wanted to mention that for the public to be aware of. Mayor members, the last one that I have is that I want to mention to you that next Monday night is September 30th. And as you recall, that was planned for you to not be in workshop session. So you will not be meeting next Monday night in workshop. On the 7th, you will meet again, and then on the 14th, you'll have a regular meeting. Typically, the 5th Monday would be reserved for a goal-setting session, but as you may recall, that goal-setting session is going to be on November 18th. So again, on Monday night, September 30th, you will not have a meeting. Mayor members, that's all I have for you.
Anyone else? Yep.
Just like the last Saturday, the 21st, we had the fire department dance. It was held at the Redmond Club, and I'm on the fire department also, and I'd like to send out a huge thank you for all those who donated by mail and all those who attended. Thanks.
And what time did the music stop?
11-ish.
No.
11:30, I do believe.
Anyway.
You said ish.
Anyone else? If not, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Second.
All in favor of adjournment, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? We are adjourned.